I have so much to say. And the events of the last few days have changed everything we thought we knew about the forest, about what goes on beneath it. We thought we understood. I mean, things went into the forest, things died, then they came back as something new, right? I mean, God, I wish it was that simple. Last night, we saw more than just monsters. And while I'm here alone, waiting for Dan to call me from the hospital, I'll write down everything there is to tell. Everything I can possibly remember. The wind was pushing smoke up the mountainside, creating billowing black clouds that faded into the trees. That fire we'd seen in the early afternoon was still going, spreading slowly up the mountain. Daniel and I stood on the fire escape for the longest time and just watched it burn. Slightly anxious, but still mesmerized.
Maybe they started it, like a controlled burn?
Daniel pondered as he leaned against the railing. My heart began to sink. They used to do those when I was a kid. My dad told me about it. They stopped after something went wrong? I shrugged, turning around and back towards the building. I don't know. All I know is that I am fucking freezing. I'm going back inside. I'll leave the door propped open for you. I drew my flannel tighter around myself. When I slipped back into the broadcast room, Daniel stayed on the fire escape, just watching. I could tell he was cold by the way he tucked his hands into his sleeves. The deep color of his face flushed as frost nipped at his skin. But his eyes were fixed on the tree line. Not on the smoke, but the tree line. "What's wrong, Danny boy?" I asked him, sitting back down at my side of the desk. I was busying myself by adjusting the various media cells on my screen, preparing a pre-recorded advertisement for a local antique store's holiday sale. There were less and less ads lately, but with less people sticking around, businesses shutting their doors for good, Pine Haven was shrinking. Daniel didn't acknowledge me at first. He just stared at that spot on the tree line, his breath appearing as a small fog before being carried off by the wind.
Do you feel like you're being watched?
He asked. The question lingered in the air for a moment. I mean, yeah, all the time, I said with a light chuckle. Stupid bird out there again? If he's bothering you, I've found that if you just toss kind of like a part of a candy bar at him, he'll dive right for...
No.
Dan answered quickly. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh.
There's something else. It's been following me around for a while now. Watching me whenever I'm here alone. That thing I met when the fog rolled in.
Now, I knew that Daniel had been having a tougher time than usual. I mean, that's obvious, right? What happened that night screwed us up badly. And it was going to be impossible to leave behind, but still. Danny had a way of always being the most hopeful, gentlest person at the station. And I could slowly see that exterior start to turn cold. In all these years, he'd stayed optimistic, but I always had that suspicion that maybe that cheerfulness was for us and not for himself. It seemed more apparent than ever. You, want to talk about it, my dude? I asked gently, pulling out his chair and patting the seat to try enticing him over. He looked at me, then at the tree line for a short while. Then finally decided to enter the building and close the door behind him. Instantly, the room felt warmer.
I don't know if I should,
he answered as he sat down, kneeling forward with elbows on his knees.
I just don't want you or Finn to, worry that there's something wrong with me. I don't want it to seem like I'm losing my grip on things.
I snorted, hanging up my headset and giving a quick glance at the lineup on the screen. We had time to spare. Bud, the first year we met, you watched me run into the woods, unprepared, willing to fight a goddamn tree to get back a body part that I wouldn't even be able to use. You're in good company for that kind of conversation. I just want to help you. Daniel cracked a small smile. It wasn't a happy one, I don't think, just a slightly satisfied one. Of all the people he should expect judgment from, I was not that person. He cleared his throat, looking down at the floor, and then he looked at his hands while he picked at one of his fingernails.
There's something out there that wears my face,
He said.
It talks with my voice. It moves like me. When the fog rolled in, I went down to get the generator prepared, just in case. It followed me back up and stood outside the door, talking to me, telling me how I should feel about myself. It reminded me of the night you lost your eye and how I did nothing about it, and how I've hated myself ever since. I didn't think I hated myself, but I'm starting to second guess that now.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting all that. What Daniel said alarmed me on several different levels. Not only because the forest had never done that before, but because I never knew he still struggled with that night in the forest. I had never asked, and we didn't talk about it. Maybe I'm not the greatest friend after all. Okay, listen up. I sat up straight, giving Daniel a stern look. That night when the chode out there took my eye, it wasn't your fault. Danny, you were in the hospital unconscious for 2 days after that. It broke your ribs. It almost fractured your spine. It kicked you in the head so hard that we thought you might not wake up ever. I know that you would have done something to help me if you could. I knew that from day one. I watched Daniel look towards the wall, the floor, anywhere but me.
Doesn't matter. I still screwed everything up then. I screwed it up last week. I'm starting to think I can't do this anymore.
I sighed and moved my head into his line of sight, leaning over in my chair. It does matter. Everyone who came before us, they fucked up too. If they didn't, they'd still be here. You and I, Finn, we're still here. So you're doing something right. A thought came into my mind. I always had the impression that Daniel was too good for this place, too good to stay here. Unlike me, he had talent and aspirations and charisma. He was a good person. If you want to quit, that's okay too, I told him. No one's going to be angry about it. We can still keep in touch. You can call me anytime. I'll even come visit when I can. I mean, you don't have to do this anymore. Daniel looked at me in silence for a long moment. The room grew eerily still. The clocks had stopped at some point during our conversation. Even the wind outside the wooden walls decided to calm. With a sigh, Dan took hold of one of my hands.
I don't want to leave,
He said.
I think those dreams and ambitions have changed over time, turned into something new. After everything, I don't think I could go back to a normal life if I tried, And besides, what would you do without me?
I smiled and gripped his hand, giving it a strong squeeze. I don't want to find out, Danny boy, I told him. So, if that shithead comes back and tries to mess with you again, just remember that it's just making things up to hurt you. None of it means anything. It's just a dick face, Dan laughed.
Excuse you, that's technically my face you're talking about. Am I a dick face?
I wore a stupid, shit-eating grin. No, but you are a Dick 4.
What's a... Oh, fuck you. What are you, 12 years old? Come on, Lynn.
Daniel stopped himself when he noticed the pure evil expression on my face. I let out a cackle and he slapped me on the knee. Hard. I got him laughing. Genuinely and at long last. Nothing would make it all better. I mean, I knew that, but this dark cloud hanging over us was too heavy to hold all the time. I knew how it felt to drown. And I knew how it felt to need someone to pull you back up when you went under. Dan took a deep breath.
I'll be okay.
He said, putting his other hand on top of mine. He was still cold from the frozen December air, soaking up the heat of my fingers.
I'm not going anywhere.
I gave him a direct, serious glare. Will you pinky swear it? Daniel chuckled and bound our little fingers together, squeezing them tightly.
Pinky swear.
He agreed. Here we were, 2 grown adults, making the sacred vow of children. I guess it's true, what they say about being afraid in an unpredictable world. Sometimes you have to return to something that feels safe. I was the first to notice the subtle shake in the floor. The wood around us began to creak, and our desks trembled, the items atop it shifting across the surface. And by the time Daniel realized, he was already holding onto the edge of the table with a white-knuckle grip until the tremors finally stopped. Dust fell from the ceiling above us, and I noticed the smallest crack in the main lookout window. Oh, dear God. I can only hope this rickety old structure was built to last.
Another one of those earthquakes.
Daniel spoke softly, finally letting go of my hand to go stand beside the window. He was looking out into the forest, where the fire had now subsided.
Think this place can hold if they get any worse?
The way the wood beneath our feet groaned, and the way the metal of the fire escape twisted and bent, I didn't know how I felt. Maybe, I shrugged. But maybe we should also start thinking of an escape plan, just in case, The day passed by, slowly and with little incident, aside from a few tame oddities. The sink in the back of the room was clogged, and I found the beginnings of a wasp's nest while attempting to repair it. All of the wasps inside were dead. A while later, the same song played on the radio over and over and over for about 2 full hours. It was something by Jackie Wilson. Eventually, we got stir crazy. so much so that Daniel insisted that we get up and dance to it. Now, I usually hate dancing, but halfway through trying to learn how to do the Lindy Hop, I guess it was kind of fun. As the day began to grow dark, Daniel and I realized something odd. We hadn't heard from Finn all day. At 7 o'clock, right at the time when Finn would have ordinarily been taking over his turn at the controls, we got a call. It wasn't him, and it wasn't our employers at the town hall either. It was the voice of an old woman that I know I'd heard before.
Evelyn, dear.
She spoke calmly on the other end of the phone.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
I looked at Dan, perplexed, trying desperately to place the voice. We were on the air, and I had no choice but to make up an excuse, chuckling weakly and anxiously. I'm certain it has, ma'am. Now, could you jog my memory and let our listeners know who I'm speaking to? There was a sigh on the other end.
Rose, darling, my name is Rose.
It started to come back to me then. Danny's first day on the job. Just before he lost his hearing. Just before the forest took its first blood sacrifice. Rose was on the phone with us. She was talking about God. I thought we blocked that number. I remember, I said, trying not to sound shaken. Of course. How are you doing tonight, Rose? What's on your mind? There was a pause, heavy and foreboding. And when the old woman spoke again, she spoke so quietly, and yet with such command. I found myself leaning in closer to listen, holding my headset against one ear.
The ground is bursting open, isn't it? We've all felt it, my dear. The great bellow from the deep. I told you it would happen so long ago, and here we are at last, on the eve of a new world. That kingdom in the forest is finally preparing for the arrival of God. You know it to be true, and your friend knows it as well, doesn't he? He's seen it. It gave him deaf ears to better see its glory. It's already called to him.
I stared at the console. Her phone number wasn't appearing on the screen. There was no number. As I felt my blood pressure rise and I noticed the look of unease painted across Daniel's face, I reached over to turn the recording software off. Gently, I leaned in, dropping my voice down to a whisper. Who are you? Really? I asked in a trembling, weak voice. Rose laughed. It was a quiet, withdrawn laugh, hidden behind closed lips. That pleasant, grandmotherly tone of hers no longer instilled false comfort in me, but rather, it seemed more menacing than ever before. But then, the voice changed. It deepened, taking on a different accent, a different tone. I heard the voice of a man, gruff and gentle, at the same time.
Hey, don't you worry now, Ginger Snap.
The voice said.
It'll all make sense to you in time.
Hanging up wasn't enough. I tossed my headset, getting it away from me as quickly as I could. My chair toppled back and I got to my feet, getting as far away from the desk as possible. Before I knew it, I was walking backward until I hit the wall. My breath was stolen from me, my heart racing as a chill passed through each and every bone in my body. Daniel was looking at me with concern and heartbreak, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have to ask. I think he knew. The sky had long been dark, the early winter sunset leaving us with a cloudy and moonless sky. But somewhere, out above the pines, we saw a brand new light. It was a sudden shock of red that rose into the air, exploding in a shower of flame.
It's a flare.
Daniel turned to the window, the shimmering light reflecting in his eyes.
Someone's in trouble out there.
I joined him at the window, watching the ball of light glimmer above the tallest trees. I realized something then. Something I should have known long ago. The Rangers had entered that forest that very morning, but we never saw them come back out. Finn was supposed to be here by now, I said shakily. He's late. How many times has Finn ever been late? Daniel's face went blank.
Never.
He said, already on his way across the room. He found the cabinet of Finn's emergency supplies, already strapping a first aid kit to his belt by the time I dialed our police station. And for the first time ever, no one picked up. The line was busy. All the lines were busy. Something was happening, either out in the woods or in the town, and it was so much bigger than us. I tried calling again, but no answer. And the last thing I wanted to do was go out there, braving the woods once again and risking losing life and limb. We'd already done it before. More than once. And it never ended well for us, did it? But I remembered the night I lost my eye, and who had carried me back to town. We weren't even friends yet, and Finn still saved us both that night, never even asking for a thank you. And then, that prick had the audacity to stick around? Oh! Give me the shotgun. I pointed at the cabinet, snapping my fingers. Daniel gave me a squinty-eyed look and just kept shoving shit in a backpack. Come on. Drop to it. Give me the shotgun. Let's go.
Lynn, you've never even held the shotgun. Start with something more your size.
I marched over to the cabinet and grabbed the weapon myself. I don't want something smaller. I want the shotgun. I scowled at him and he just smirked and shook his head. Don't you laugh at me.
I'm not laughing at you.
Daniel commented, closing the cabinet and strapping the backpack to himself one shoulder at a time.
I'm just laughing at how some things change, but other things don't.
Yeah, at the time, I have to admit, I didn't know what he meant by some things change, but looking back, I think I get it now. I'm remembering the day we first met, when Daniel introduced himself to me, and I was certain that I would absolutely hate him. Oil and water. We'd never get along, none of it would work. And here we were, years later, ready to go into the woods and die, side by side for a friend. Before Daniel and Finn, I always thought that Jennifer would be the only true special person that I would have ever have had in my life. My soulmate. I hung on to that idea for a long time, even after she chose Elijah instead of me. Even after she died. Maybe it's time for me to let her go. Maybe she's finally ready to rest. Daniel and I put on our coats, strapped on packs and ammunition, and rushed down the metal staircase just as we did all those years ago. Well, last time it was a fool's errand. A mistake. This time, it was a rescue mission. It was still a stupid idea, sure, but I don't think we'd be able to forgive ourselves if we didn't try. And the flare was still in the sky, straight ahead and half a mile up the mountain. As we approached the tree line, I noticed Daniel stop, his eyes fixed towards something unseen between the pines. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but the gentle fall of snow. Still, I didn't need to see it to know what it was. Hey, man. I grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. Don't look at it. Don't think about it. It can't hurt you if you don't let it. Was that true? I didn't know. I was making a wild guess, and, well, I suppose it worked, because moments later, Daniel had torn his eyes away from the tree line and was the first to step into the forest without looking back even once. He pulled me along by the hand as the light of the radio tower disappeared behind the bare, frozen trees. I don't know how long we walked. It felt safer, not being alone, but that uneasy feeling of being watched never left. Every hoot of an owl in the trees, every rustle of branches, every squeak of a small animal felt like the spies of the forest were watching our every move. And even when nothing was there, we felt hunted. The feeling only grew stronger when we found huge, sunken holes in the ground. At a certain point, the damage from the earthquakes could be seen. Trees were sinking into the soil, deep cracks were forming between the lines, and some of them were leaning to one side, but it wasn't until we'd ventured further than ever before that we noticed tunnels breaking through the surface of the land.
Must have been a cave into the mines.
Daniel said quietly, crouching down at the edge of a steep fall. Down below, we could see the gnarled system of roots reaching deep down into a dark cave that could have gone on for miles. A horrible, rotten stench was coming up from the tunnel. I remembered the last time we'd fallen into the mines. I don't want to think of what we would find down there now. I don't like it, I told Dan, tugging on the back of his coat. Let's find another way around. I really don't want you falling in there. Daniel stood up carefully, watching his step as he backed away from the edge. We only got a few steps away when the ground began to tremble beneath us. Subtly at first. Shit! I hissed under my breath. We both stumbled back, Daniel pulling on my arm as we made a quick escape from the crumbling ground. The quake took more of the forest down into the cavern with a loud rumble. A tall, old pine began to creak and snap at the base of its trunk as it fell, crashing down into the pit on a bed of frozen dirt and snow. We didn't fall in this time, but it was a close call, and it was very, very loud. Ooh, something probably heard that, I said, not even bothering to brush the dirt and dust off of myself as I began marching forward. We made a huge circle around the damage so as not to tempt a second cheeky little mudslide. We have to find Fen quick and get the hell out of here. I am tired of playing these stupid games with... I went quiet. We both stopped walking, standing perfectly still, and just listening. Daniel looked at me perplexed. He didn't hear anything, but I did. Something was moving underneath us. Something big and quick. I could feel the vibration in the ground as it dug its way through the tunnels, coming to investigate the sound. I turned to Dan and put a finger to my lips, walking slower and with more care than ever before. My heart was racing. It was hard to breathe. Below us, something released a muffled but bone-chilling roar, causing us both to stop dead in our tracks.
Stand still.
Daniel signed with his hands, slowly and precisely.
Wait.
We waited, hardly moving a muscle. The quakes in the ground traveled from one side to the other, as if the beast below was patrolling back and forth, over and over. Finally, those vibrations in the ground began to move away. It lost our trail and was moving back into the depths of the mountainside. It's gone, I signed back with my hands, at least for now. We walked another hour, at least, feeling the air grow tighter as we crept further up the mountainside. The signal came from somewhere nearby. Now, it was just a matter of hoping and praying that whoever held that flare gun was still alive and waiting for help. The pines grew taller and older the further we went. I'd never seen trees this big before. They eclipsed the moonlight above us, blocking out the sky and the stars until we were left in a cold, black void. The smell was the first thing that led us on the right path. When we broke into a large clearing, we found a pile of dead trees, bones, and burnt flesh stacked up in the snow. Jesus, the stench was overwhelming. So bad that even from several feet away, we were both pulling our coats over our mouths and noses to keep from being sick. It was the same horrible smell I remembered from the tunnels, only 100 times worse.
It's still smoking,
Dan said, taking a sharp breath. He regretted it immediately after, as he turned away with his hand over his mouth.
God, I think I'm gonna be sick.
As Daniel hunched near the bushes, trying to keep his last meal down, I dared to creep slightly closer to the burn pile. It was a disgusting collection of remains, charred bones of animals and people, some of them fused together as if they'd melted into one body. Some still had flesh attached to the bones, faces stuck in eternal screams. Others were moving, trying to escape but too weak or too broken to move anything but their fingers and jaws. I was so distracted by the burn pile that I didn't notice what else circled the clearing. Fresh, blood-soaked bodies hanging from the trees above our heads, dripping into the snow. I choked back a scream and stepped away just as Daniel finally found the strength to look up. We were both staring up at them. At least a dozen corpses that had been ripped to pieces. The remaining parts suspended by vines and gently swaying in the wind. They were hanging around us in a circle like some sick arrangement, like an art project or fresh game left out to drain. They were all wearing the same uniform. This is Evelyn McKinnon at 104.6 FM, and I just need a moment to catch my breath.